I want to talk about now in this section about the heart of a leader versus, say, the mind of a manager. And there is a really big difference. So I just wanted to talk about two things that I've noticed over the years that actually probably distinguish between the mind of a manager and the actual heart of a leader, and what affects those decisions and affect the reactions to their staff and the people that they're leading. So I believe this is a very important key. As I talk about this, one is expectations, and number two is perception and perspective. So I'm going to talk a little bit about expectations, and then we'll move on to perception and perspective, because both of them are very, the best word is that one can be very damaging and one can be very empowering, depending on which way you use them. So the first thing I want to talk about is expectations. These two key principles. Number one is expectations, the other one is perception. But expectation, for example, managers, and I've written a bit of a list here, that managers tend to, through their mind and through their position, is this is what they'll tend to expect of their staff or the people they're leading. They tend to they expect the work to be done, they expect it to be on time, they expect it to be without any mistakes, they expect the person to be quick, they expect the person to listen to them, to follow up their work, they expect that person to work because they're being paid for their job, so they need to do that work, and they need to do it a certain way in certain boundaries and forms. They believe that if you've been paid for it, you should be grateful, that they should show respect, that they should work sometimes longer hours to get the work done, but it's an expectation, all right? Where leaders tend to expect a little differently. Leaders will expect their people that they're leading, staff or just normal people that they're following, that they're leading who are following them. Leaders tend to expect people to be proactive, to take initiative, to work smarter, not harder. Leaders will tend to expect people to solve problems, not just keep running to them all the time as a manager to solve it. Leaders will want them to, if they do make mistakes, they learn by the mistakes. As I said, they'll want them to take initiative. They'll want them to be loyal and respectful, but not out of fear or that they have to, but they just expect that that's the way that they do. They expect them to be honest, and leaders expect people to be honest and to talk back, in the sense of not talking back to them, but expect them to communicate to them if there's things that are issues, so it doesn't get blown out of hand. And so that's what managers expect, and that's what leaders expect. So the first thing that you're going to have to do to move from that mindset of a manager to the heart of a leader is to start to identify your expectations. And one of the things that you can do is, sometimes I just do a bit of a graph where I look at me, so this is you, and I start to list what are all my expectations of my team or my people and what I'm doing. Just again, so I can get to identify them. So you need to do that. Identify your expectations. I think the second thing you need to do then is identify what you think their expectations are. Because as I said before, expectations can either hinder you, or they can actually make a greater success for you. So the next thing you need to do is start to identify what you think their expectations are of you. And so you start to list down those expectations. Some are reasonable, some probably aren't reasonable. And then what you get to do is, between these two, once you've identified them, you can start to make sure that yours start to correlate with theirs, and if not, you'd make the necessary adjustments. That's what leaders do. Managers will just expect that their people have to match their expectations, and if they don't, they either tell them they have to change, or they tell them to leave the job. Where leaders will find out what their expectations are and what the other people's expectations are, and start to adjust. A leader takes accountability. A leader looks at the responsibility of having the ability to change and the ability to look at how do they do that. And I'm not saying you just change to the limiting things of your staff or your people. True leaders will look at how can both parties lift up their expectations and get to a greater success and greater assignments and greater vision, and therefore achieving that purpose of what they're wanting to do. So that's their first little assignment. Just identify that. The other thing to do is, sometimes you might find that when you've identified your expectations here, that when you look at the actual reality of what's happening, is that it's maybe down a lot lower. So you expect one thing, and yet the reality that you're getting from the people that you are leading, you don't get that reality. Again, you have to go back and be accountable, and you need to look at this gap that's here And how do you fix that? How do you maybe upskill them? How do you performance manage them? How do you have time with them to find out how they can improve up to more of your expectations? The other thing is that you have to look at, is there anything that's unrealistic in your expectations? Have you moved into being the mind of the manager and expecting too much? And maybe you need to move into the heart of the leader and learn how you can work and close this gap. So it's not a matter of closing the gap up or totally down and lowering your expectations. It's a matter of working together so that you're a true leader managing the performance of those expectations. Now let's quickly look at perceptions. This is what managers will tend to do. They will tend to have a different perception on things. So they will perceive that sometimes someone's trying to steal their job or push them out of the job by being really good. Sometimes they'll think, oh, I might look bad to my boss if my staff aren't looking good and doing the job well. Sometimes the managers could perceive that people are talking behind their back or not supporting them in some way. Sometimes they perceive that people don't understand like they do, so they jump in and just do the job for them. They don't let the person learn, so they perceive that they're better than their people they're managing. Sometimes they perceive that their staff are lazy. Sometimes they're selfish. Sometimes they're just a bunch of numbers and they're just people getting paid. That's the mind of a manager. This is why this is in this foundational leadership, because it is foundational. What is the heart of a leader versus the mind of a manager? So I believe that leaders perceive and have a perception, where they actually create their people that they're leading to be better than themselves. I mean, I'm a father. When I was young, before I had kids, I'll tell you, I was competitive. I wanted to win all the time, and I didn't care how much I trod someone else down. I wanted to win. I wanted to be successful. But when I was 30, I had my first child, and it was interesting because what I started to learn as a father was a totally different perspective. I started to learn that my kids, I actually want them to be better than me. I want them to be more successful. I want them to be better at what they do. I want them to have more finances. I want them to have more happiness. I want them to have a better chance. So that's a father's heart. So I realized that the heart is different than the mind. And so I realized that with people that I lead and staff that I have, as well as others that I teach, I need to teach about the heart of a leader rather than the mind of a manager. And the heart of that is a leader will perceive to try and train and help their staff to actually be better than they are. And they don't have fear with that. They actually have satisfaction and they have achievement of that. They want their staff to learn. They want their staff to develop. They want their staff to achieve. They perceive they want their staff to be coached. They want to be led and led to greatness. And the other thing is that the heart of a leader does is they realize that their people and their staff actually are real people. They're people that have families, they have problems, they might have kids, might have mortgages, they have other things. They realize that these are real people. And so leaders' perception of that is that they will sit down sometimes and find out how their people are doing. And knowing that most of their life they're at this job that can affect their social life as well when they go home. So leaders will actually perceive how they can be part of that team, be loyal to them, and have their people loyal back to them, but care about them as a person as well and want them to be better. And so therefore these unmet expectations, when they don't show up, so if you have the mind of a manager and the expectations aren't showing up, they're unmet. It's probably one of the greatest problems that shows up in leadership and in businesses that I work with is unmet expectations between a boss and a staff member, or between the leader and a staff member. So it's one of the most important foundational skills I want you to grasp on, is identifying those things. How can you change it? How can you help them? And changing your perception or mindset into not the mind of a manager, but the heart of a leader. And how do you start to do that? Because you don't want these unmet expectations. I've seen in all sorts of instances between staff and leaders and bosses and managers, I've seen resentment, I've seen frustration, I've seen disloyalty, I've seen staff morale go down, I've seen people leave, I've seen sick leave increase, so much cost in training and retraining staff and recruiting staff, and lack of production and all types of things. And often it can be solved simply by getting the heart of a leader to change their perception and change their expectations. Not lower them, but change them in such a way that they can work together. And then change their perception into what a true leader is, and then raise up their staff and that leadership skill. And then you're going to see the results where morale will go up, self-esteem will go up, people will start doing more work, and people will actually start to get behind you as a leader and work with you and want to achieve the things that you want to do. And some people sometimes say to me, oh, but that's just fantasy. No, I disagree. I've seen these principles work in hundreds, if not thousands, of companies that I've worked with in the last 40 years. And I have seen individuals and departments and groups completely start to change for the better, and leaders gaining more promotions and more favor as leaders when they actually understand the expectation level and how to work with that, and then how to have the heart of a leader, not the mind of a manager, and change their perception towards things. So I want to talk a little bit about how powerful perception is as a key for you to become a leader into this next section. Thank you.